Hello. Can everyone hear me okay? Hmm. Hello everyone. Can anyone actually hear me? Or is... Oh good, right. A little bit of delay on that. Right, okay everyone, so hello. This is probably gonna last about an hour and a half-ish. So I'm gonna go through a few things that have happened. As the title says, this is the post-Amsterdam edition. So there's that, which we're going to go over in a minute. I'm just trying to find... There we are. There's the dry dock questions. So slightly different. We'll go over what happened briefly in Amsterdam, what I've been up to with various trips recently, and then we will be going on to dry dock questions, and then we will answer some of the chat questions. The only other thing I'd say is, don't worry, I'm not actually going to be playing World of Warships this time. I've decided after feedback that people get a little, I get a little bit too distracted when I'm doing that. So, but I have lined up a few replays from the past few days, so I'll be running those in the background instead. So hopefully, you will have my full attention. So I'm just trying to scroll up to where we left off with the Discord questions before. Okay, so that's too far. Right. Where were we? We were on about the 24th of March last time. That's that question. Ah, yes, there we go. Right. That's that. Right, so that's all that lined up. Now, where's my console gone? There we go. Right. Sophie Patterson, and I am doing dry dock videos. This is just basically a live stream that I occasionally do to catch up on other questions and talk to people about things that would take up valuable question answering time in the dry dock. Right, so yes, as you may have guessed from that picture, that was me leaving for Amsterdam last week. That was quite the interesting little journey. As totally bizarrely, this was an EasyJet flight that actually left on time. Don't worry, balance was restored later in the day when they promptly became incredibly late again, as per usual. So now let's see if this is still working. I hit a key. A thing has not happened. Ooh, a thing happened. Okay, that's just another picture of the plane. That's not very helpful. Neither is... Oh, and that was the plane coming back. That was the one where... Yes, this was the one where sanity prevailed and EasyJet was late again. Oh, it's interesting watching me flicking through this on XSplit and then watching the live YouTube stream in a separate window, and we'll be seeing what the lag is like. Right. So, there was a little bit of loot from Amsterdam. Come on, catch up, you useless piece of technology. There you go. So yes, thank you very much to the subscriber who gave most of this. The Norrig pig from IKEA is not in fact part of the loot package, but pretty much everything else in that loot package is. It was very much appreciated. This was a loot package that was given for Mrs. Drac, actually, in recognition of her putting up with me talking about warships at all hours of the day. Incidentally, quite ironically, the chocomel in the middle of there, very tasty by the way, I must find a way of getting my hands on more of it. The chocomel scanned on the security systems as a bomb, which led to quite the interesting situation, shall we say, in Schiphol Airport, because they put the bag through and they're like, "What is this undifferentiated block of something on our X-ray scanners?" And I was like, I didn't put any undifferentiated blocks of solid anything in the scanners, and then it turned out it was in fact a chocomel carton. So after some very tense moments whilst they excavated it out of the bag, and then had a big laugh about the fact that it was apparently chocomel, which is apparently something that people in the Netherlands like, and now so do I. Dilemma. This is that is something that I am going to deal with a bit later on in the stream. So yes, there was that, and I got this as loot. Gigantic biscuits of some kind. I don't know why I'm mousing over them. You can't see the mouse. More stroopwafels. I highly approve of stroopwafels. Any country that feeds me stroopwafels when I show up is very, very high on my approval list. And yeah, this anime thing, which I will, I suppose, eventually watch since I was given it, so kind of have to. So yes, that was very enjoyable, and for the 147 of you that are watching, just to clear one or two things up, yeah, the Lucky Charms, I rather like those. Just to clear one or two things up, I said in the last dry dock previous to me going to Amsterdam that it was all under my own power, and it was. I paid for my own plane ticket and car hire and everything. By the way, if there are any of you Dutch viewers on the stream at the moment, please write a letter to the relevant authorities and tell them to sort out Schiphol Airport. That thing's more of a maze than Gatwick. Or Heathrow, for that matter. It took me an hour and a half to get out of that blasted place. Anyway, let's see if the N key works. Oh, no. Let's try the B key. That's a better one. Yeah, so anyway, so yeah, going there under my own power, intention to just look around the museum, meet subscribers, and get in an infinitely long queue for some kind of goodie bag. I don't know how to pronounce it. It's Dutch. Sorry, Eric's asking me what I meant by Schiphol. Was it Schiphol, Schiphol, Sci-Fi Pol? I don't know. I'm English. We learn foreign languages by speaking English to them slowly and more loudly. I got a B in French. I mean, fair enough, I did a bit better in German, but there you go. But yes, other than that, about 3-4 days before actually going, which was obviously about 2-3 days after the dry dock was uploaded, Wargaming got in contact with me and asked me if I wanted to be there as their guest, and I was like, okay, what does that mean? Because I don't want to be financially tied in to something that could limit or otherwise regulate my content. And it turned out that basically what they meant was come and have a tour of the dockyard with your guide as an ex-commander from the Dutch Navy who captained a number of ships. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to say no to that. So the good news about that part is that as well as being able to meet a bunch of subscribers and hand out a bunch of goodies, I also managed to get to see a bunch of the ships they had there and a handful of areas that I wouldn't have otherwise got into, that are restricted from the public. So lots of photos to come. Got plenty of photo material for at least 2 5-minute guides, plus a more general, this is what happened at the museum. So yes, that's Amsterdam, I believe. That's, as I say, outside of actually doing a live video, that's probably all I needed to say about that. And now I'm going to watch with the rest of you guys until this updates. There. Oh, yes, there we go. Right. This is something else that I've been doing in the past month or so. Welcome to the panoramic view from the bridge wing of HMS Queen Elizabeth, the Royal Navy's flagship and largest carrier in the fleet. And yes, that's part of the rest of the Royal Navy dockyard. Don't worry, this was taken now, quite some time ago, so the layout and everything and which ships are where has all changed, so I'm not giving anything away. Although if I did get dragged off kicking and screaming in the next 15 minutes, you will know why. So this was courtesy of a very kind subscriber who managed to get me invited aboard to have a look around my first large carrier, first carrier of any sort actually, to be perfectly honest. So that was quite the interesting. As you can see, the sky was a typical British grey, which is always comforting. So let's see what happens if I press this key. Does anything happen? Something should happen. Ah, that thing has happened. So yes, this is just some more pictures from aboard the Queen Elizabeth. So again, nothing particularly sensitive. Nice view of the ski ramp there. There we go, with gazebos. Wow, the stream lag is real. So yes, there is the bridge. Very interesting little place. Going up. I'm commentating to myself as I'm flicking the pictures, and I'm forgetting that you guys don't actually see the updates for a bit. So yes, looking down the ski ramp, it's surprisingly steep actually when you get towards the top. HMS Queen Elizabeth, of course, currently now on a Westland exercise, which is obviously going to be rather entertaining. Come on, stream, catch up. There we go. Yes, I met this little character. This is one of the Phalanx CIWS systems. It made worrying beeps, and you'll notice down at the down on the bottom right, there's this thing that says "Danger may move without warning." And I say it was making very interesting, worrying sounding beeps, even though it was covered. So we had a joke that we should install portal gun turret noise and a portal gun turret noise pack on the thing. No, and then shortly coming up should be yes, upper view of the bridge. Just flick through these. This is more my engineering. Me taking pictures of various ropes and cables and rooms. Get through those. And this was the other place I went slightly more recently, which some of you will have caught. The Queen Elizabeth's sister ship, HMS Prince of Wales. The weather, bizarrely enough, for the fact it's in Rosyth, which is up in Scotland, was a lot better than the weather several hundred miles further south in Portsmouth. Go figure. There's a very big crane. So this was an open day to the public. So where have I? Sorry, that was my phone. Hopefully nobody heard the message alert, but I don't know where it is at the minute. Yeah, so this was, as you can see from the bears, this was an open day to the public. This the places you could go were somewhat more restricted. I mean, also the fact they were just finishing it. So, excuse me. Oh, a street bottle. Spartani 548 asks, which is your favourite Prince of Wales now then? I like this one because this one's over on the right side of the ocean, as in it's still afloat, which is very useful for me because I was on it. If I found myself on the previous Prince of Wales, I suspect I would have somewhat larger problems, assuming it's even still there. Um, Michael Vertber, will you be at Amsterdam sale event next year's 8 August? Depending on when it is in August, I don't see any reason why not. Yeah, this was just me taking... Yes. Yes, you did History Waffle. I very, very much like them. So it's just flicking through random photos of Prince of Wales, mostly the islands, because that's pretty much the only thing they let you see. Some pretty nice photos, though. At least I think. As far as I know, yes, they have located the wreck of Prince of Wales. Unfortunately, a lot of the uh, wrecks in that area are being illegally salvaged, which is a big problem, I think. But unfortunately, since they're mostly in Indonesian waters, the Indonesian government seems to have something between zero and nothing in terms of interest of stopping people from walking off with the pre-World War, pre-atomic bomb detonation steel. Although I'm fairly sure there are easier sources of that than a battleship, but eh. Just in case anyone is wondering, all those little X-shaped holes in the flight deck are all part of the emergency fire suppression system. Not something you want to get caught in if it all goes off, but fortunately they weren't trying to land aircraft with public on board, so we were safe, which is always nice. Traffic light systems. Yeah, it's not just one island on the ship, it's two islands. It's very entertaining. They had the one of the main elevators down there. Do, do, do. Ah, that's it. I've worked out how to press the N key again. That's always a good thing. Yes, as you can see from the photo that should be coming up for you in a couple of seconds, they had a rather large tower to let people on and off the ship, so we couldn't go through the ship itself. Will I be coming to next year's Tank Fest? Sure, why not? Don't know how many days I'll go for, though. But it's a good chance to meet people. Maybe we'll do another alternate history thing. Now coming up is possibly the world's weirdest lensed panoramic shot. It makes the carrier look a bit like a chibi. But hey, I was literally back against a warehouse wall, so there's not really a tremendous amount else I could do. Oh yeah, the crane. The crane will be coming up in a minute. That's the big crane that I used to help build the thing. And some nice stern views. We're back at the beginning? Yeah, we're back at the beginning. Okay, so now I've been on both Queen Elizabeth class carriers, which is quite fun. So thank you very much to both subscribers who organised those two trips for me. And I shall be doing a reference back to them much more extensively later on. Sort of as a thank you thing. So let's see if we can get this working. Right, so there's that. Is this? And then we can finally get on to answering some questions, hopefully. Assuming this all works. So I'm just waiting for the replay to load. I just realised there was a micro patch, so it'd be ouch. Oh yes, of course. Sound. Just had my ears blasted by the login music. Does this work? Yes. Okay.
Quarters.
Right, let's turn that volume off. Right, so the experiment appears to be working. Right. Yeah, I saw Amsterdam sales in August. It's just August bank holiday, which is usually the last weekend in August in the UK. I have a pre-existing commitment, but if it's any weekend but that... Oh, I've just seen someone post 12th to the 16th of August 2020. Don't see any reason why I shouldn't be there. Yeah, I'll stick it in the calendar. Sorry, these stroop waffles are far too tempting. Right. So, we're 23 minutes in, it's 12 minutes past 7, and let's get on with catching up with some Discord questions all the way back from the 16th of March, I think. So the judge, 2107, asked, are there any other ships that can take HMS Hood's spot when she goes out to fight the Bismarck, and how would that ship presumably do against Bismarck and Prince Eugen? The only other ship that was immediately available in the home fleet that theoretically could have taken Prince of Wales' spot, other than flipping the places of Prince of Wales and Hood around, would have been to send out Prince of Wales with King George V, which Admiral Tovey could have done, but as the Commander-in-Chief Home Fleet, he chose to remain back in port and try and coordinate the larger efforts to track down the Bismarck, as a result of which Hood was sent out. So, yes, in theory, you could have had King George V and Prince of Wales going out to attack Bismarck instead of Hood. How that would have done, well, it can't exactly do worse than explode. So there's that. Given King George V's performance, admittedly in its final battle, Bismarck was a little bit worse for wear. But given that Prince of Wales managed to land some fairly nice hits on Bismarck, even in its limited role in Denmark Strait, I think if they'd followed the plan of the two battleships pretty much concentrating on Bismarck and then moving on to Prince Eugen, or just letting Norfolk and Suffolk catch up, which they almost managed to historically, and deal with Prince Eugen that way, I can't see Bismarck standing up to the prolonged fire of two King George V class, and the King George V class aren't vulnerable to what most likely sank the Hood. I wasn't at Detling Viper 22. I had other things I was doing. So what else have we got? USS Blobfish. Which ship wouldn't roll over and die despite the world basically being out to destroy it? Well, it's going to be a tie between USS Laffey and HMS Warspite, really. Um, Laffey just laughed off everything the Japanese Navy could throw at it, and Warspite at Jutland laughed off everything the High Seas Fleet could throw at it. Locksborn asks, nautical myth is full of ghost ships. Which historical ship do you think would have the best claim to haunt her builders or those who sent her out, and why? Hmm. Good question, actually. Probably Vassar, just out of petty spite of them having done such a terrible job. Blitzkrieg asks, what do you use for your naval war games? Is there a particular way you play, or does it vary from time to time? So if you're talking about the Battle of Texel video, the alternate Battle of Samar video, it's a highly adapted version of General Quarters 2. Basically, the combat is worked out using General Quarters 2 rules with a few house rules here and there, and the whether or not you're actually in combat, what you can see, etc., rather than being decided by miniatures on a table, although we do have miniatures on the table, what the commanders are actually told they can see and what they think they can see are determined by a rather elaborate system of blind man's bluff we kind of set up, where people take the roles of spotters and arbitrators, etc., and they pass the information on to the two people who or more who are playing the commanders of the various units, and they then make their decisions based on what they think they're getting information-wise. Mutsu asks, what was the reason Belfast and the other town class cruisers didn't adopt the planned quad turrets that were prepared for them? Same issues that plagued King George V turrets? No, the town class were originally designed with 4 6.6-inch, but when the Edinburgh subclass, which turned out to be Edinburgh and Belfast, were under development, they thought about upgrading to quad 6-inch turrets as a way of further enhancing the town class's firepower, albeit that Edinburgh and Belfast were in many ways almost a half sister class compared to the other towns. The reason they didn't adopt them, they couldn't quite make them work in time, and there were also concerns about them being a bit crowded. The towns, as with pretty much all treaty cruisers, were pushing very close to the limit, and realistically, to get quad 6-inch turrets in, they would have had to expand the ships yet again, the new ones, while they're under construction, which would have put them at probably 12,000 tons, and the extra cost and delay involved in doing that would have reduced their ability to produce new cruisers, which at the time they needed as many of them as possible. SwiftSpeed 100 asks, what are your thoughts on Military Channel's ranking of top 10 fighting ships back in 2005? Here's what they ranked as the greatest warships in modern history. Then the list apparently goes from 1st to 1 to 10. Iowa class, Nimitz class, Queen Elizabeth class, Ticonderoga class, Fletcher class, North Carolina, Bismarck, Essex, Deutschland, and Admiral class battlecruiser. You might as well call it the Hood. I don't know why the Deutschland class is on there for a start, or the Ticonderoga for that matter. See, the thing I don't like about the greatest warships in modern history is it has no particular qualifier, because what do you mean, most powerful for its type? Do you mean most saw the most action, got the most results? It's like, what is your qualifying criteria? Because if you take the battleships on there, you've got Iowa, Queen Elizabeth, North Carolina, Bismarck, and technically the Hood. If you want to rank them by absolute strength and capability, then assuming you're not looking at Warspite with its hilarious plot shields, you'd have to go something like probably Iowa, then a tie between North Carolina and Bismarck, then Hood, then Queen Elizabeth class. But if you want to analyze it by which ships did the nations get the most bang for their buck from in terms of actual live combat against other vessels, the Queen Elizabeth class would take the top billing, and then what would you would have the Queen Elizabeth, then Hood, then North Carolina and Bismarck tied because they both had one. Actually, no, Bismarck had two battles, so they'd be above the North Carolinas, and the Isles would be on the bottom because they never fought another battleship. And around the houses we go. So things like the Nimitz class, the Nimitz class has dominated the better part of 3 or 4 decades in terms of carriers, but they've never actually engaged in full-on naval combat. So how do you tell whether they are the greatest warships or not? Fletcher class definitely belongs on that list, and the Essex as well. I mean, not a lot of those choices I don't have an issue with per se. They on almost any list of greatest warships they'd rank, but without any explanation as to how they're ranking them, the order doesn't make a tremendous amount of sense, and I'd question the inclusion of the Deutschlands and the Ticonderogas very heavily. Hypothetical naval. This is Admiral Nyano. Hypothetical naval war battle, war plan red. Royal Navy versus the U.S. Navy. 1919 or 1936? 1919, the Royal Navy has a very decisive edge. They're voluntarily scrapping a bunch of ships, but they still have a huge numerical advantage, and they also still have a fair bit of a firepower and qualitative advantage overall because they've got Hood's not online by 1919, but they have all the Revenge class and the Queen Elizabeth class. Now, the US has the standards, but the overall US Navy is very much outnumbered at that point. They don't have the Colorados. One or two of the later standard 14-inch standards aren't even in service. A lot of the 14-inch standards at that point have issues with accuracy, as in they don't have any. The later ones, ironically enough, the earlier ones like Texas and New York, which technically aren't standards, but you know what I mean. The earlier US battleships actually have significantly greater accuracy in their gunnery, mostly thanks to having been in the 6th Battle Squadron. The triple turrets on some of the later US 14-inch standards had severe accuracy issues that weren't solved until the 20s and 30s. So a 1919 Warplan Red, the Royal Navy has a firepower advantage because they've fixed the issues with their shells with Green Boy shells. They have a numerical advantage and they have an accuracy advantage, and they actually have a speed advantage as well to a small degree. 1936 is a completely different matter. 1936, they've got equal numbers of capital ships. The accuracy issues on the 14-inch standards have been fixed. All the smaller ships have been ditched. You've got the Colorados and the Nelsons have come into service, as has Hood. That would be a much harder one to call, especially since a 1936 Warplan Red style battle would also involve aircraft carriers. And aircraft carriers and their firepower in 1936 are very much an unknown quantity in terms of how effective they would actually have been. So I wouldn't want to call that one, except for it would be a very vicious battle without looking further into it. That's just comments. Carter Kanya asks, given that BB3 USS Oregon is the thumbnail for the dry dock, will there be a pre-Dreadnought episode on it at some point? Yeah, at some point. I think it's on the list somewhere. It's just quite far down it, which is something that applies to quite a lot of ships, actually. Oh, for flip's sake. Oh, right. In all my excitement of answering that question, I didn't realise the replay had finished. Sorry. Let me line up another one. and get back to answering questions. Bum, 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 bum. Move that over there. No, don't move that over there. Otherwise... Admiral Shearer, how long's the list? Pages? Is that 9 pages? And considering each page is 52 lines, which basically equates to a year's worth of content, go with that. It's probably longer now. I haven't looked at the back end of the list in quite a while. Yes, I say Oklahoma. What's your real name? Nice try. Da, 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 da. Life Beyond Living asks, what would have differentiated at Jutland if the 5th Battle Squadron and 3rd Battle Cruiser Squadron were assigned to their original fleets rather than the 5th being attached to the battle cruisers? Depends on whether Jutland is taking place shortly before its historic date or shortly after. If it's shortly before, probably just more ships exploding. The whole point of why 5th Battle Squadron and 3rd Battle Cruiser Squadron were swapped was so that 3rd Battle Cruiser Squadron could go and have some gunnery practice up in Scapa Flow, which showed, when you consider the HMS Invincible, the oldest battle cruiser in the world and the oldest one present at Jutland, basically sucker punched the Lutzow, the most modern battle cruiser at Jutland, to such a degree that it can pretty creditably be said that Invincible was responsible for Lutzow's sinking before Invincible inevitably exploded. So yeah, if the two have been switched back because Jutland's taking place a few weeks later and they've just come back fresh from gunnery practice, then the chances are actually that the battle cruiser run will be quite different because, well, they're battle cruisers. They'll be keeping pace with BT, so they're going to turn up with a significantly larger force than they did historically with the 5th Battle Squadron trying to play catch up and lagging behind. And you've also got an entire battle cruiser squadron that can actually shoot straight. So the German battle cruisers will probably be in a lot more trouble than they were historically. If the British ship Mutsu asks, if the British had fully committed to Fisher's Baltic project, how do you theorise it would have gone? Incredibly badly. The Baltic is a U-boat's paradise when it comes to slow-moving troop transports. Rezav asks, I keep hearing about the British shells carrying more bursting charges or something. Can someone explain this to me? Yes, basically the bursting charge is the explosive payload of an armour-piercing shell. So the armour-piercing shell is obviously mostly made of metal, and the idea is that it penetrates the side of a ship, hopefully, and the fuse activates, and after a certain amount of time, which obviously equates to a certain amount of distance, which varies depending on how thick the armour it's penetrated is, the shell explodes. And it's the explosion that does most of the damage, because, let's face it, on a 20 to 30 to 40,000 ton battleship, if you poke a 14 or 15 inch hole in the side of a ship, that's actually a relatively easy damage control exercise. It's not going to do all that much. Conversely, if you detonate anything of between 20 and 60 kilograms of high explosive in the middle of a large metal container like a shell, you end up with a big explosion deep in the heart of the ship, which wrecks a lot of things, and then you have very hot, very large, very high velocity metal splinters, or otherwise known as shrapnel, flying all over the place and wrecking even more things. How much stuff you wreck partially depends on the size of the shell, but also partially depends on how powerful the bursting charge is, because obviously that's the initial blast will be bigger, but also the velocity and therefore energy behind the various metal splinters that the shell was made up of will be greater, and you have to balance this out with how physically strong your shell is, because obviously if you just pack loads of explosive in, you've created a high explosive shell which will just plaster itself and break up against any kind of heavy armour. British shells generally, when it came to armour-piercing shells in World War I and World War II, tended to carry a a significantly larger bursting charge than many other nations, so the individual shell hit could theoretically do a lot more damage. For example, one of the things I always like to cite is actually the 15-inch 42 caliber gun, the gun that Warspite, the Queen Elizabeth's renowns at a Hood, etc., carried. Despite being a World War One gun, the World War Two edition of the shell that it was carrying actually had a larger bursting charge than the 16-inch 50 caliber Mark 8 shell that the USS Iowa had. Obviously, a 15-inch 42 didn't have as much armor penetration capacity, but if it did get in, it would theoretically actually cause more damage, which is very weird to think about. Onto my phone, it's somewhere around here. Alright, 7:30, so I think another 10 minutes of this, and then we'll go into questions from the stream. What do you think would be the result if the Americans focused on designing and building ships like the Atlanta class that were meant for anti-aircraft purposes? Probably very bad things. The Atlanta class were good at what they did. They were also singularly not something you wanted to take up in a surface action. They were very good at killing enemy destroyers, but because they were so lightly built and relatively small for cruisers, a well-handled large destroyer could actually do some fairly significant damage to an Atlanta if they were the ones who got the first shot off. But the main thing is, unless an Atlanta got really close, they weren't going to beat anything like a proper light or heavy cruiser in a full-on gunfight. I mean, come on, they're tiny. They're not, you shouldn't expect them to. But if instead of building things like the Brooklyns and the Clevelands, the Americans just spammed Atlantas, you'd probably overwhelm the Japanese cruisers, but you'd be giving the Japanese cruisers vast numbers of free kills, both to torpedoes and guns. Because the annoying thing about having an Atlanta in a 8-inch cruiser gunfight is it's just too small to really be a major threat at long range, but it's just large enough to initiate the fuses on the shells. Oh, we're nearly through March's questions, you never know. Oh, Hood asks, what would a battle between rebuilt Hood, Prince of Wales, and a semi-rebuilt similar to Repulsor's refit Tiger fare against Bismarck, with Hood at the head of the line, Prince of Wales, and then Tiger? Also, hand-waving improbable implosion of the German... That the latter part of the question is not something I can answer here. Okay, rebuilt Hood, assuming they'd gone full rebuild, the maximal rebuild they wanted, then Prince of Wales, and then a semi-modernised Tiger at Battle of Denmark Strait. Well, they're probably going to win. Hood's not vulnerable at that point to the shell that took it out. It's going to have vastly improved fire control systems. It's going to have modern fire control computer. It's going to have fire control radar. Prince of Wales, well, is Prince of Wales, but it still managed to score hits. So then you have two effective battleships engaging Bismarck, and then Tiger, albeit that Tiger would be old, and if it's been partially modernised, a Tiger is more than a match for Prince Eugen. About the only problem you're going to have is Prince Eugen's up front. So you're probably actually going to end up with Tiger and Prince of Wales engaging Bismarck for a while, whilst Hood plasters Prince Eugen, which is rather cruel. Replay's ended. Thank you for pointing that out. Sorry, I keep forgetting this thing. Right, let me queue up another one. I should probably try and find some automated way of doing this. Let's get... See, this is the funny thing. First two live streams I get too distracted by actually playing. Now I'm too distracted answering questions to notice that the live stream has stopped playing the replay. Where is this? Right, there we go. Just re-establishing the relevant window so I can actually see what I'm supposed to be doing. Bum, 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 bum. Cicero asks, do warships still have provisions for boarding parties? Yes, they do. Um, they're usually called marines, but yes, ships still have lockers full of automatic weapons and people trained to use them, plus all sorts of fun things like GPMGs and stuff that can be mounted on deck rails. And that was another Stroop waffle gone. I'll probably put these away, otherwise I'm going to end up as a perfectly spherical Drac in a vacuum. Board MP3, what if US carriers had swapped places with the battleships at Pearl Harbor and all the US carriers were sunk instead of the battleships? How would the Pacific War have played out and would it have affected US doctrine? Well, yes, it would have affected US doctrine because they would have had battleships and no carriers. How the Pacific War played out? Much worse, because much as their rebuilds were very nice, the standard battleships as they were at Pearl Harbor without carrier support are no match for the Imperial Japanese Navy. If the US carriers get blasted and all sunk at Pearl, what exactly can they do? They can sail at 21 knots out into the Pacific and get murdered by the Kido Butai. That's not really very helpful. They would have to either stay in range of massive land-based air cover, or, to be perfectly honest, the US would just drag every available carrier that wasn't in the Pacific at the time and therefore hadn't got sunk. But it would still delay things massively. How accurate is the battleship comparison that Combined Fleet put out? Is it fair in perspective? No. Not by a long shot. Some of it is rather blatant bias on the part of some of the people who wrote it, and some of it, to be fair, is based on either misinformation or information that was just flat out lacking when it was written. But no, the battleship comparison table that Combined Fleet put out is just, no. Just don't. What is more likely to win in a hypothetical fight between British and American fleets right at the end of World War II? American fleet easily. They've got far too many Essex class. Oh, an extra detail, both nations receive their sunken ships as well. Doesn't really help. I mean, what does that mean? It means the British get back things like, well, they get Prince of Wales, Repulse, Hood, Ark Royal, Glorious, Courageous, bunch of R-class, etc., Barham. What does the US get back? Well, the unsalvageable ships from Pearl Harbor and 2 of the 3 Yorktowns plus Wasp and Lexington. I think even in terms of ships sunk, the Americans get the advantage there, but it's the end of World War II. It's just like you could almost walk from San Diego to Tokyo on the decks of American fleet and light carriers. Of course they're going to win that one. What's going on with this? Okay, Vanguard's still doing its job on the stream. What asks, the sailor user in your profile has a luxuriant handlebar moustache. Can I assume you sport such a moustache in real life? Unfortunately not. Those of you who have met me or have seen pictures or video of me now, guys, now since those are up on the internet, will know that I do sport a beard and a moustache, but no, not a handlebar moustache, unfortunately. It's far too much maintenance. Biginu asks, how did Drachinifel become your name? Basically, I wanted a name. I used to go by a couple of different names at various places on the internet in my youth, but they were all very common. Well, not very, but somewhat common, so I'd arrive at various forums or sites and try and set up a user account, and This user account has been taken. Would you like this other random user account with various weird numbers and symbols attached to the end? No, not really. So I wanted something unique that no one else would have taken, and so I thought, well, given that the internet, at least the bits that I frequent, surprisingly enough, mostly are English speaking, I'm going to need a foreign name, but there are a lot of foreigners who speak English, so what else can I do? And then I realised, oh, well, I'm half Bolivian. Next time I go to Bolivia, I will search out weird dialects and near-forgotten languages in Bolivia, because very few people even have heard of the place, let alone know any of those languages. And so I did. I went over there, and I found some of the locals way out in the sticks, and we got chatting, because not everyone, but almost everyone speaks Spanish, when possible in Spanish. And they were telling me, one particular group I met were telling me about their language is spoken by about 600 or 700 people now. As far as I can tell, it appears to be a very weird hybrid of Quechua and Old German. I think it's something. I think it's probably the influence of some of the Mennonite settlers they have there. But they had this term Drachinifel, and I thought, oh, that sounds interesting. And it's just one of the words that stuck in my mind. And when I came back, I was like, right, I know what I'm going to use from now on. So I did. And that's the story of how Drachinifel became my name, at least online. Bum, 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 bum. That I've kind of covered in a dry dock. Mephalop asks, were Age of Sail battles effective in terms of tactical gains? From what I know, there were often heavy losses for both sides because the ships are made of wood, but because of this, were battles that see secondary or were losses outweighed by tactical gains? Age of Sail battles tend to come in one of two flavours: either knockdown, drag-out fights where everybody got hurt, or massively overwhelming victories. And that basically came down to the tactics of the admirals. So you've got something, but to be honest, actually there were always tactical gains, because if you look at something like, say, the Battle of Chesapeake Bay, you've got to remember, it's not control of the ocean isn't just control of the ocean for control of the ocean's sake. Control of the ocean also means freedom for your trade and therefore your economy to flourish in the middle of a war, and also constraining an enemy's economy. It also means bearing in mind the Age of Sail is also the age of colonialism, it means that whoever controls the ocean can supply their men and move more men and supplies into a contested theatre. The one who loses the battle can't do that, which basically obviates a lot of countries' colonial ambitions. So, say the Battle of the Chesapeake Bay, even though it's a relatively indecisive engagement between the French and the British navies, it doesn't change anything, except the British Navy withdraws, but in so doing, that means the British situation at the Battle of Yorktown remains screwed. Whereas if the Royal Navy had won the Battle of Chesapeake Bay, they could have landed reinforcements and supplies, and possibly the Battle of Yorktown would have gone a different way. So even when it was when the battle itself was a score draw, the tactical implications and strategic implications were quite high. And then, of course, later on you get things like Trafalgar, the Nile, Copenhagen, Sinop, etc., which result in near enough the utter destruction of the enemy fleet in question. And obviously, those have fairly significant tactical gains. Where are we looking? Is Vanguard still going? Wow. Yes, it is. Just. Where are we looking at now? How much of a chance would Bismarck have had against the Yamato? Not much. Yamato is one of the few Japanese battleships that actually has radar and has excellent optical fire control. I suppose, in theory, if Bismarck lasts long enough to be refitted with fire control radar like Tirpitz, it can at least hit the Yamato. But outside of very niche circumstances, Yamato would demolish the Bismarck. But then again, Yamato would demolish a lot of things if it ever hit it. Next question that was from Tyrannical Clown. USS Oklahoma, how would both Yamato class fare against all four Iowa class? Badly. they can't fight. I mean, they're designed to fight multiple capital ships, but they're not designed to fight multiple capital ships on the scale of the Iowas. Um, for Iowa class, it's like, okay, well, they're engaging two, and yeah, those two will probably get fairly battered, again, outside of niche circumstances like bad weather, but you've given the other two free reign to just rain death and destruction down on them, so yeah, game, set, and match US Navy. Skullship, 3 turrets or 4. Is removing the rearmost turret an advantage or a hindrance? Generally, 3 turrets are better because you tend to go with 3 triples instead of 4 twins. That gives you an extra gun with slightly less overall impact on your ship in terms of turret space. The disadvantages are the triple turrets are slightly more, well, they are more complicated, which makes them more difficult to fire at high speed. Theoretically, if you need to get in... Okay, the Stroop Waffle container randomly threw itself off the table. I have no idea. Stroop Waffle ghosts. What else is new? Anyway, 3 turrets for 4. In theory, if you lose 2 turrets on a 4 twin ship, you're only down to 4 guns. On a 3 triple ship, you're down to 3 guns. But to be honest, if you're on a ship and you've lost 2 turrets, you've probably got more things to worry about than the exact number of guns you've got left. Thank you for reminding me the replay had finished. Right, let's stick another one on then. I'm running out of replays. As I said, did I? Did I say in the dry dock? No, I think I've said it in this upcoming dry dock. If anybody has any World of Warships replays and or any other form of replay, naval game replay that they'd like featured as background content in a live stream, then please feel free to send them in. Trek to don't most Iowa and Yamato fights come down to fire and damage control in most people's minds? Yeah, probably, but that scenario is 4 versus 2. 4 versus 2 is, with any kind of even vaguely comparable battleship technology, is not a good thing. Right, we've only got 2 or 3 questions before I hit a nice deadline on the Discord question, so then we'll move over to questions from the stream. What are we looking at? Lemithra asks a detailed question about German and British gun doctrine and asks for further sources. Norman Friedman's Naval Firepower. Very good source and almost the basic go-to when if anyone asks an initial question about how did X gun work or what was this or that nation's firing firing procedures, Norman Friedman's Naval Firepower is almost always the first go-to. If he doesn't cover it in there, then it's probably a fairly esoteric thing that needs a lot more digging. And that actually takes us to March the 23rd. I should probably note that down somewhere. Typing is hard at the moment because I've been doing medieval reenactment today and I forgot to put my gauntlets on when I went out to fight, and I got sword smashed into my right hand first finger. That hurt a lot, and as a result it's now currently in a finger splint, so I'm now poking at keys with a extendomatic finger, I guess. Well, that's covered like 2 weeks worth of dry dock questions, so that's not too bad. Right, now save that. Right, so let's minimise that. And... Oh, 538 people. Wow. Right, okay, well, this... What was it? It's now just before 10 to 8, so I think I can keep this stream going for another... Was it 10 to 8? Probably half an hour or so-ish. Before I need to go and find myself some food. So yes, that's the top chat. Thank you, YouTube. How do I go and visit all chat? Otherwise the people who started won't. Top chat, live. Aha! Live chat. That's not helping. Now that's irritating. Okay, so for some reason it's not letting me see much further back than a certain amount in the chat. I don't know why. That's very irritating. Okay, well, if people ask questions earlier in the stream and they're still around, feel free to re-ask them, because I can only see back so far for whatever unknown reason. Can I pop out the chat? Maybe that'll help. Okay, well that opened up a little bit more. Yeah, that opened up a little bit more. So yes, anyway, as I said, if you asked a question early in the stream and you'd like it answered, please feel free to re-ask it. Because unfortunately, for whatever reason, this chat feature isn't actually letting me see more than probably about 10-15 minutes back. Victory for Cake asks, would you ever do a video about food and catering in the various navies? Maybe including information about rum rationing, torpedo juice, and American ice cream ships. I've got no objection to doing so. It would require a hell of a lot of work. It's not part of naval history I've done especially much research into before. And I can't think immediately off the top of my head of any particular sources that I could go to get a summary across nationalities. But sure, I guess I could put it on the back burner as a long-term project. Will you do a story on the Casablanca class escort carriers? Yeah, they're on the list, as is almost everything. Happy Habit, yes. My World of Warships playing style is interesting, shall we say. Sreko. Okay, I completely apologise for absolutely wrecking your name, but I think Sreko Kuvallo asks, is there any nation in the first part of the 20th century that could theoretically outbuild the US Navy? Yeah, until until World War I bankrupted it, the British Empire could quite easily outbuild the US Navy because it had far more naval infrastructure around. I've gone over that before in a few different dry docks. As for anybody else, no. The British Empire's combined GDP was the only one that was greater than the USA's. The USA's was bigger than anybody else's by the time you get into the 20th century. The main advantage the British had was their existing lead, although obviously that became a lot less of a problem when after Dreadnought came out. But the other thing that was important for the British being able to have that superiority in the 1900s and 1910s was the fact they had a lot more dockyards and a lot more industry dedicated to producing warship-related items, such as guns and such. Admiral Tiberius, hello. He says, with the benefit of hindsight, would you say the French practice of placing all main guns in quads forward of the superstructure was a good or bad idea? In theory, it's a good idea if you can get all the guns functioning properly. It allows you to shorten the citadel if you pack the guns in nice and tight, although for some reason the French obviated an awful lot of the advantage you get from that by spacing the quad turrets out a fair bit. Go figure. They also, to a degree, addressed some of the issues of if you go with an 8-gun armament in 2 quad turrets, you can theoretically lose half your armament to one shot by basically making them actually a pair of twin gun turrets in very close formation in the same wrapper, which meant that if the shell penetrated the armor and killed everyone in one side of the turret, theoretically the crew on the other side should be fine. That does have the slight issue of the fact that any shell that's powerful enough to do that is probably going to jam the roller bearings of the turret itself, which is not going to help. So yeah, there are advantages to the way that to having 2 quad turrets forward as your main armament. The French didn't necessarily exploit all of them, though. So I'd say, yeah, French practice is good in principle. Their execution of it, maybe not so much. They did make very nice looking ships and relatively powerful ships, but there was the other issue of the fact that they kept blowing up their own guns until they figured out what they'd done wrong with their shells. Yeah, I think if you'd asked the British to build, or the Americans, or yeah, if you'd asked the British or the Americans, or even to be honest, the Japanese to build a similar kind of design, they might not have looked as nice, but they probably would have been somewhat better from an engineering standpoint. But then again, the French are almost in as bad a boat as the Germans when it comes to capital ship design. When in sort of the 1930s. Musanex asks, do you have any other hobbies apart from ship thingies like playing instruments? Well, as I just mentioned, I do medieval reenactment. I play in medieval reenactment. I play three characters. I played John Pocklington, who is an archer on the Agincourt Rolls. I play his grandfather, Sir William de Pocklington, who is a knight, which allows me to put on my Western European knightly armour for the 14th century. And I also play Grof Mihály Károly of Hungary, it was Count Károly of Hungary, which allows me to wear Hungarian lamellar armour and swing sabres around, which is always fun. Albeit I was swinging my big two-handed sabre when I got my fingers taken out today, so But as I said, that's more a matter of me wearing gauntlets. So yes, that's a hobby. I build and paint models, both for display and gaming. It should come as no surprise to most people that I do. To be honest, these days not so much play, but these days I do build and paint Warhammer 40k models. 3D print a few of them as well. What else do I do? I actually do archery, which is tied into the medieval reenactment, but I did archery before I did medieval reenactment, and the archery is both for my own health and fitness and just for fun. I can draw a surprisingly powerful warbow. I have 3 warbows that are between 110 and 130 pounds. I can draw up to 120 pounds comfortably. 130 pounds is pushing it. I can draw it and I can shoot accurately maybe half a dozen shots from my 130 pound bow, but I do need a bit more practice to really be comfortable with that thing. Other than that, I have a bunch of pets. We have a leopard gecko who is currently in her cave, and we have 6 harvest mice in various different tanks, so I maintain them. I'm just trying to look around to try and remember what all my other hobbies are. Oh yes, I like steampunk, so that's every August bank holiday I go to the Steampunk Asylum, have done since it started over 10 years ago. I wish I had the time to do that stuff a bit more. I end up collecting alcohol. It's very strange. I like buying alcohol. I then don't find the time to drink it because as the only driver in the family, I end up driving an awful lot. So I have a vast collection of vodka, whiskey, and other weird and wonderful alcohols that are probably worth an awful lot more than when they were bought because they're so old and unopened. Playing instruments, well, I've got trumpet, medieval trumpet that I can kind of play. I'd like to learn to play it a little bit better. In fact, I would like to learn to play an instrument, but I'm pretty bad, and I just don't have the time. What other hobbies do I have? Rock climbing, free sort of bouldering, more technically, free rock climbing without harnesses. That's a hobby of mine. I used to fly remote control aircraft quite a bit. Then I crashed a really expensive one, and with the rise of drones, there've become more and more restrictions on those. So I sold most of those. I still have a couple of small drones I fly around inside the house for laughs. Um, Nerf wars with Nerf wars with my younger siblings, cousins, and nephews. They're always fun. Um, what else? And making random things. I like making odd things. I randomly made a steampunk lightsaber and a steampunk sonic screwdriver out of various plumbing fittings and stuff. That was all fun. I've probably spent more than enough time describing my life on this question. I should probably move on. Where are we? Hayden Dill, is there a ship you won't review? Oh, stream ended again. Oh, not the stream, the replay. I just noticed that again. Right, let me. That's that. That's that. Right. This is the last one I've got in stock. So, come on. There you go. This is the last replay I've got in stock. So unless someone has dropped me another replay in the past few minutes. Right, so this is a ship I won't review. I think someone else. I saw someone else respond to that. Yeah, basically ships. Near enough, basically ships that were started building after 1950, and or still in service today, because partly to because a lot of their capabilities are still classified, so you can't give an accurate report on them, and also partly because I don't want to get involved in the politics of things of the modern day. Benjamin Lecrone asks, had the Fashoda crisis become an actual war? How did the French Navy compare to the Royal Navy at the time? What if the Russians become involved? At the time of the Fashoda crisis, yeah, just look at the look at my French pre-dreadnoughts video for my opinion on roughly how that would have gone down. It wouldn't quite have been Second Pacific Squadron, but it would have been quite the yeah, it wouldn't have gone well for the French. Let's just say that much. Unless, yeah, well, if the Russians got involved, yeah, no, just no, no, just it would have been. There's a reason it got resolved amicably, and it's because it was possibly one of the worst times to actually start a fight with the Royal Navy. Victorifique asks, "Donde está la biblioteca?" It's right behind me, actually. Well, not right behind me. It's about 3 foot to the right and 8 foot back. But Golf 2428. How realistic is the game Atlantic Fleet? Well, it's more realistic than World of Warships, but that's not. I was going to say that's not exactly difficult, but to be fair, World of Warships actually does have a fair bit of fairly complicated mechanics behind it when it comes to shell penetration calculations and everything. They just have game balance and stuff, which takes it away from historical values, including especially the foreshortening of range, but keeping the penetration values. But I'm not going to go off on that rant because I've done that before. Atlantic Fleet is more accurate in some ways. It's actually less accurate in other ways, like the fact you get a turn. Everyone gets a turn. Realistically speaking, if you've got heavy cruisers in there, the heavy cruisers are going to fire off their shells a lot faster. and I question some of the damage and accuracy models that they have in Atlantic Fleet. Admiral Tiberius asks, if Richelieu had been ready and available to the British during the Bismarck's efforts to break out, do you think they would have used it? Most definitely. It's a fast battleship, fast modern battleship armed with modern 15-inch guns. Why would you not? Definitely would have sent it out. And that would have been quite the interesting fight, actually. I do like Atlantic Fleet, but I do sometimes find it incredibly frustrating with the some of the random elements they throw in that are a bit, well, not a bit, they're very, very unrealistic. As Golf 2428 says, it does need a lot of fixes and updates. Drew Carlson, you LARP? No, I do not LARP. I do medieval reenactment. LARPing involves a lot of foam and unrealistic stuff. I use carbon steel armor and swords that are basically exactly the same as actual live swords, except for the fact they haven't gone to their final grind and had an edge put on them yet, as my fingers will attest to. I do medieval reenactment, so period accurate clothing, period accurate weapons, armor, etc., etc. It's much closer. It's a living history thing more than live action roleplay. I have done live action roleplay, but not for the medieval period. C6 Ranger asks, was the Shetland Isles ever considered to be used for more than just an airbase for anti-sub operations during the Second World War? The Shetland Islands. So I'm just going to see if there's any... unfortunately, they didn't really have any major anchorages the same way that... Oh, well, hit the wrong button. They didn't have any major anchorages the same way that the Orkney Islands had for things like Scapa Flow. They were used for a test. One of the islands was used as a test range for Operation Vegetarian, I think. To be honest, the main problem with the Shetland Islands is that for the vast majority of the war with the Germans in Norway, they're actually too close to Luftflotte 5, which can barely reach most of the British Isles, but can reach the Shetland Isles with more of its aircraft. So, yeah, it's there were a bunch of other operations taking place on the Shetlands. Prisoner of war camps were a thing. Secret agent ferrying missions were also a thing. It's a relatively unknown thing. The Shetland Islands were used as a base and ferrying point for a lot of secret agent operations, especially, unsurprisingly enough, heading to Norway. But it was lots of little bits and pieces all over the place. Article 12 asks, why is the Queen Elizabeth class carrier called a supercarrier when it's smaller than most supercarriers like the Forrestal class? Generally, I think mostly because you look at the effectiveness of the ship. Deck space-wise, hangar space-wise, it is up there with supercarriers. Excuse me. I'm just having some iron brew. Yeah, deck space-wise and hangar space-wise, it is up there with the various supercarriers. It's also, through the use of automation and other things, and the fact that its flight deck is so huge, it has a very high sortie rate. So, although it can't carry quite as many aircraft as some of the larger supercarriers, like the Nimitz, etc., it can actually get the aircraft it has up into the air very quickly, which means its effective firepower is actually quite high. For what it is. Why has that question reappeared again? Animal 16365 asks, why do the United States Navy keep using triple expansion engines in their battleships when HMS Dreadnought use turbine engines? Partly because the Parsons turbine engines that Dreadnought used was a case of British technology being ahead of everybody else's just about, and Parsons wanted a rather large amount of money in commission if you wanted to license their designs, which, given that the Congress was already strapping the US Navy for cash, they weren't really in a position to do. Also, although turbines are very efficient at higher revolutions, the revolutions they're most efficient at actually spin the propellers too quickly. So the early turbines, although they allow you to get a lot more power down and hold it for longer, therefore you can go faster, you cannot go as far. Triple expansion engines, at least for a period until they invent things like geared turbines and lower speed cruising turbines, the triple expansion engine gives your Navy a significantly higher range, and given that the US Navy has to think about operating without the massive chain of naval bases that the British have, and also operating across the Pacific for a long time until turbines can mature as a technology enough to give you a long enough range for a reasonable given amount of fuel. In some ways, it's better to stick with triple expansion. Plus, helped by the fact they didn't actually have turbines on a battleship scale ready to go until a little bit afterwards. But where are we going? Christopher Abernathy asks, Avarov versus Scharnhorst Armoured Cruiser Edition, who would win? Oh, that's a nasty question. The Scharnhorst technically, I think, has a slightly more uniform armament. The Avarov has a slightly heavier armament. They've got a roughly similar speed. That's actually going to be one that's going to be very hard to call, because both the Scharnhorst class armoured cruisers and the Avarov displayed remarkably good shooting. They've got similar grades of armour. That's actually going to be a really difficult one, I think. I wouldn't want to call it. About the only thing that might swing it would be possibly the fact that most of the times that encounter is likely to happen is the Avarov is near enough as makes no difference the flagship of the Hellenic Navy, so they might have put a little bit more effort into the crew, so there might be a slight crew edge for the Avarov versus the Scharnhorst, which, although it was one of the top of the line armoured cruisers, it was an armoured cruiser in a much bigger navy, so maybe 55-45 Avarov. But without drilling that down into extreme detail, I wouldn't want to make much more of a call. And now all of a sudden, everything's what? Oh, the heck! All of a sudden, massive amount of questions just showed up. I think the chat just decided it was going to give me back all the older older questions. Viper 22 points out, yes, HEMA isn't reenactment. I did say medieval reenactment. I did still do HEMA as well. So yes, you've got in terms of people who like to run around with long swords, you have HEMA, Historical European Martial Arts, which is, to be honest, near enough all about how to fight with them. You have medieval reenactment, which is the sort of, say, the living history thing, the clothing and equipment and everything else. It still has a fair emphasis on combat, but tends to be the combat can be more for show. It depends on the group that you're with, and then you have LARP, which is LARP. So yes, I've done HEMA. I now do medieval reenactment. I occasionally drop back into doing HEMA to keep my sword fighting skills up, but I'm mostly a medieval reenactor now. Has the... Oh no, the Otago is still alive. Oh yes, this was this battle which... oh, well, I'm not going to be alive for very much longer. I remember this bit. I wonder if anyone sent me any replays recently. No. Oh well. That means that that is gonna... Yep, that's gone dead. Right, let me switch to that second. Sorry, this is back at the Amsterdam pictures. Let's add a couple of new ones. Sorry, I'm just trying to add something so you've got something to see. There we go. So a few of you were asking about ships portrayed in the old colours. And that, if I've got everything right, is one example that somebody did. Now, where's the other one, which is... Is it working? There we go. Yes, there you go. A Type 45 in 1900s era Royal Navy colours. Now, wouldn't you want to see that? I know I certainly would. Where have I put the chat? There's the chat. Right, I'm going to leave that there for the minute. Because I don't have any much else to put up for the second. Let's see, more questions from the live stream. We've got about 15 minutes left, I think. Dubsy 102, without Vanguard being possible to be built, let's say the 15-inch turrets hadn't been stored, would we have been more likely to see the Lion? Quite possibly, I would think. The Vanguard was very much a we can build this at the same time. I mean, they were having issues with Lion's triple turrets, but without knowing that they were going to get Vanguard, there might have been a bit more push to get at least one of the Lions out there. AJ on cars, what do you think of the Type 45 destroyer, and how would you increase the size of one of you if you were in charge? I think I've answered that before. I remember answering that relatively recently. Cresso, how do you like Vanguard in World of Warships, and how do you play with her? Well, you've seen a few of the instances how I play with her. I like her a bit more now. There's been a few patches to the game. When she came out, she was very badly implemented. Generic person asks, what if Admiral Yamamoto had survived and gone on to lead the Center Force? How would the Battle of Samar end? Worse for the Americans, because for various reasons, Admiral Kurita really dropped the ball. Admiral Yamamoto would struggle to do worse, and certainly could have definitely done a lot better. I think he probably would have continued to press the attack on Taffy 3, so even though a lot of his ships were getting plastered from the air, I don't think his ships would have ended up in the kind of rather bizarre circumstances they ended up with in the first place, because I think he was a bit sharper than that. He probably would have had his tactics up and running properly. This chat is very bizarre. It keeps throwing... Occasionally I just get dumps of things, and then all of a sudden it's inserting questions I've already answered into the I don't know. Um, Roger Tarjono, would it be possible for you to do videos about the designs of ships from games like World of Warships, like the Zhao, and where it actually came from? Well, as you'll know from the 5 minute guides, I've got no problem with doing never built ships that were designed, things like the Montanas or the Tosas and things like that. When it comes to ships from games, if the ship is a historically designed but not built ship, then I will review it, but I will review it purely from the standpoint of the historical perspective. The fact that it's in a game is rather irrelevant, apart from the fact that it may have inspired somebody to ask for it. If it's a completely whole cloth invention, then no, I wouldn't, because this is a naval history channel, not a completely random events channel. Matthew Wittman asks, how would a fight between Richelieu and Bismarck have gone? I remember covering this way back in the day. I can't remember whether it was a dry dock or... Well, it must have been a dry dock. But it was quite a while ago. So... How would a fight between Richelieu and Bismarck have gone? Would it depend quite a bit on how the engagement came about? Because although they both have a similar armament on paper of 8 15-inch guns, 8 15-inch guns, obviously Richelieu's are in 2 quad turrets, Bismarck's are in 4 twins. Their armour is nominally similar in terms of thickness, but obviously very different in terms of design layout. However, not all guns are created equal. Richelieu's guns are modern 15-inch guns, and they're fairly powerful. Bismarck's guns, when the shells actually work, have a ridiculous level of penetration. It also depends on when the fight happens. If we're talking about a theoretical alternate battle of the Denmark Strait, Bismarck at that point still has an advantage in fire control systems over Richelieu, and Richelieu still hasn't solved its problems of its shells exploding in its own guns. But if we assumed that at least the exploding shells in their own guns issue was not a factor for that battle, if Richelieu is closing, sort of the tactics used by Admiral Holland would be perfect for Richelieu. It angles its armour, which isn't as much of a thing in real life as it is in World of Warships, but it still is a thing. If it angles its approach going in, it can still use its entire main battery. Bismarck has to basically be broadside or near enough, and Bismarck can't run away from Richelieu. So it would be a very interesting fight, I think. As for who would win, it's difficult to say. Both ships are capable of knocking the other one out. No doubt about it. I think it's going to come down to who gets the first few hits in and starts taking out critical systems. It'd be a very difficult one to call. I tentatively give the advantage slightly to the Richelieu purely because it has that option of going all in and still maintaining its complete forward firepower, whereas Bismarck's angle of engagement for maximum firepower is more limited. But that's probably the main advantage that Richelieu holds. People are telling me the August bank holiday next year has been moved. Okay, let me have a quick look at that. August 31st is the August bank holiday. That's going to be an interesting one. And we've got early May bank holiday, May the 8th for VE Day. Well, the government did something sensible. Colour me surprised. Gautier asks, what if the Dominions had been allowed to maintain their own battleships separate from the Royal Navy? They couldn't have afforded that many of them, and it would have made the Washington Naval Treaty negotiations very interesting, because that's one of, if not the major thing that the Americans were very worried about happening. Basically, the Royal Navy they would sort of saw it as the Royal Navy trying to sneak warships in under the radar almost. I'll tell you what. Tell you what I'm going to do to introduce a little bit of since I've run out of replays for this particular one. Since what I will do is let's take out those two, that one, because those are maps. No one's particularly interested in those. What I will do, whilst for the rest of the stream until we go offline, is I'm going to put that on a 15-second slideshow, and I'm just going to upload a bunch of pictures from one of the videos. So I just uploaded the picture archive I used in the War on the Great Lakes video. So there's something a bit more interesting to look at in the background than a single ship just sitting there and staring at you constantly. Excuse me. Yes, so if the Dominions had been allowed to maintain their own battleships separate from the Royal Navy, the Washington Navy Treaty negotiations would have looked very different. But if places like Canada and Australia had decided they were going to say, no, these are our navies, we're going to run them as completely separately to everybody else, short of turning around and calling them liars to their faces, then not a lot the Americans could have done. But I doubt there would have been a treaty, to be perfectly honest. Blown Away asks, why were Dutch submarines so successful during the first months of the Pacific War? Was it simply having working torpedoes, or was there more behind it? Partly, they didn't have the Mark 14, so their torpedoes actually worked. They were also somewhat highly motivated, for obvious reasons, but also they had the advantage of, weirdly enough, although they were operating in the Pacific, of what was technically a home field advantage, which was that this was where they trained to operate. They knew the waters quite well, certainly better than the Japanese who were moving into them. And the Americans were stymied, as I say, by the sort of somewhat broken torpedoes, and the British were stymied by the fact that the fleet submarines that they had stationed in the Pacific that were supposed to do pretty much the same job all got called back to the Mediterranean, where it turns out using massive fleet submarines in shallow waters like the Mediterranean doesn't work very well. But it basically meant that the only fleet of submarines with working torpedoes and any idea of what on earth they were doing in the Pacific was the Dutch, which gave them an immediate advantage. And being a well-trained navy, they immediately set about blowing up everything in sight that was flying the Rising Sun flag. Shadow Nagato, how would the Scharnhorst fare during the Battle of North Cape if, ignoring how it was done, it had somehow had its refit done so the Royal Navy doesn't know about it? There's actually one of the few battles where it doesn't change that much, because outside of hitting Norfolk once, Scharnhorst doesn't actually hit that much and gets its sensor systems taken out in relatively quickly. They might have been more tempted to try and stand up and fight against Duke of York if they'd had the 6 15-inch guns instead of 9 11-inch guns. But that probably wouldn't have helped them too much, considering Duke of York basically had them dead to rights at near almost point-blank range by surprise, thanks to having the superior working sensor suite. If they'd taken... And the other thing is, if they stick around for a fight, it means they're going to end up being mobbed by the destroyers a lot earlier. Zaphod says, is Viribus Unitis on the list? Yes, it is. There's the Tegethoff class. It's actually been done way back in the day of robo-voice videos, but it is on the list of videos that need to be re-voiced. Yeah. Dun, dun, dun. Oh, good, the slideshow's working. Templar asks, have I heard about the submarines during the Civil War? Pioneer, American diver, Hunley, alligator, and intelligent whale. Yeah, yes, I have. I rather like the intelligent whale name. It's quite cute. Um, yes, I have heard of them, and yes, there it will at some point eventually be a video about them. Not soon though. Okay, so I think we're nearly done with this live stream because I can smell the food cooking, and we're coming up. It's 1 minute 41, so we'll take it up to 1 minute 45. Hellspiker, post Amsterdam. It's post Amsterdam because it's the first live stream I've done since I went to Amsterdam, and the early part of the live stream covered some thoughts on Amsterdam itself. A Happy Hobo asks, on the subject of medieval combat, will you do a special on some of the more crucial medieval naval battles? Yeah, sure. At some point, why not? That would be actually quite fun. I could get some of my medieval equipment out and run around in it, showing how they fought on ships in the medieval period. I actually quite like that idea. Now I've got to just find a kid's playground and use their wooden climbing frames and everything to simulate the cogs and castles of cogs and hulks and things like that, the various naval ships of the period. But yeah, I can do that. Um, Maybe when the weather's a bit nicer, I can break out the old armor and swords and try running around narrating whilst in full plate armor. Virus Guy 5611 seems worried that I can shoot heavy war bows. Yes. Q&A library. Harvest mice are protected. Yes, I'm part of a harvest mouse repopulation program. So they live in the tanks here. They live very happy lives, and many of their children go out and repopulate the harvest mice in the southeast of the UK. Hellspiker says, have I seen Todd's workshop video on longbow versus armor serious test? Yes, I have. I have. I was very impressed by it. Two of my bows are actually made by Will Sherman, the guy who made the arrows for that test, and a bunch of my arrows are as well. Yeah, I quite like that test. It's not completely comprehensive. There's a lot I could go into on that. But this is naval history, not medieval armor and Agincourt history, although I could go on and on about that as well at some point if anyone ever felt like listening to me. Basically, what it proves is that against a decent, well-made breastplate, you are like if in the 15th century for Agincourt, you had a well-made, relatively thick breastplate, you were unlikely to be pierced through by arrows. Very unlikely, obviously. Although if you watched it in close detail, you would have seen the shockwaves going through the ballistic gel. And if that's your body, I don't want to really be the person behind that thing. But yes, it shows how effective medieval armor could be at the sort of 80th percentile upper end of things. That's not necessarily the whole thing. If you want to know a bit more, Matt Easton did a follow-up video to that where he goes into those principles in a little bit more detail. But yes, I'd say this is a naval history stream, so I don't want to divert off onto there unless someone wants me to do a medieval reenactment and weapons technology stream at some point. Kamietis146, got any Lithuanian vodka? No, I have Russian vodka and I have English vodka because weirdly enough, English vodka won like best vodka in the world a few times in a row. So I got some of theirs. So Chase vodka. William Kruger, yes, I hate Marmite. Can't stand the stuff. And there's that question about intelligent whale again. Blogs, why do you hate HMS Eagle? I don't hate it, it wasn't a very good carrier. um, Battleships converted to carriers are generally aren't particularly good, and Eagle unfortunately suffers from being a pre-World War One design battleship, so therefore not especially large in the grand scheme of things. Certainly compared to the other major famous battleship to carrier conversion, which was the Kaga. So it's a smaller ship and it's a battleship, so it's not especially quick. So just it wasn't that good of a carrier. All the other conversions tended to be, well, they're either the battle cruisers or the Fisher's honestly not a battle cruiser governor conversion, so they're bigger, they're faster, and therefore they make more capable units. Eagle gave relatively good service until it got torpedoed, but in a world where you've got Yorktowns and Ark Royals and Shikakus and Illustriouses floating around, it's never going to rank up there on the front line of things. This is getting very confusing. I'm going to have to find some other way of ordering the chat because I'm just getting... There's like new questions coming up, but there's a bunch of questions that I've already answered coming up as well. Nictasia? Nicotasia? I think. Well, you probably have some idea of what I'm saying and who you are. How does a person get in touch with you in order to collaborate or discuss British 1919 and 1921 ship designs? Drop me a line at 5minuteguides@gmail.com. 5 as in the spelt out number, so FIVE, minuteguides@gmail.com. That's basically the go-to for contacting me. Ridgewood Machine, I assume you know USS Texas is now closed to the public. Yes, I do. So yes, my trip to the United States will not, unfortunately, include a trip to the Texas. What's going on? What should we do? Things happening. Right. Are you aware of the new CG line in World of Warships? I've heard about the British heavy cruiser tree coming. I'm quite excited for that. Although quite why they've gone with triple 9.2s instead on the top end design instead of quad 9.2s like the one they've had the design for, I'm not entirely sure. I'd rather like to see quad 9.2s. Brent Paulus, which Navy in exile in World War II had the biggest impact? Difficult to call, but I'd probably say it's going to be a three-way tie between the Norwegians, the Dutch, and the Polish. They all their navies in exile got to be pretty big, and they all had fairly important accomplishments in their own way in different theatres of operation. So it's very difficult to call. The Polish navy had a considerably greater role in just day-to-day surface operations, but the Royal Norwegian Navy, although it also did that, also did quite a lot of special forces support and spy missions on the Norwegian coast for semi-obvious reasons. And the Dutch Navy was kind of a little bit of both in between. Thomas Berkney, will the stream be available later on as a video? Yes, it does get auto-archived to the channel, so it should be available for watching later on. That's like the fourth time chat has tried to get me the chat. What? Oh, for flip's sake! I was about to say it's the fourth time it's tried to get me to answer the intelligent whale question, and then it just completely reset itself with a whole new bunch of things. What the heck is going on? Okay, I have gone a little bit over time, but the oven timer hasn't gone off yet, so whatever. Lord Chesalot says, do you think the new carrier's two-island system is a good idea? Does it have any precedent in history at all? This is going way back to when I was talking about my visits to Queen Elizabeth and Prince of Wales. It does have some precedent back in the past, although it tended to be trying to keep things forward and back of a longer single island. I do think it's a somewhat good idea. The ship is easier to command and control from a more forward position, but aircraft are easier to control from a further back position. So if you've got the opportunity to have two separate towers that one can do command and control of the ship, the other can do command and control of the aircraft, and you can place both of them in the optimal positions for their role, then sure, might as well go for it. I suppose in theory you've also got the capability of, if one of them gets taken out, assuming that some of the officers survive, you do have another island from which you can try and do basic command and control to replace the capacity that you lost on the other one. So yeah, I think it has a good it's a good idea. It does have a little bit of precedent. It'd be interesting to see what future carrier designs look like and if they take it up, because obviously the Ford class predates the Queen Elizabeths in design. The Traveller 1415, what are future constructions for the Royal Navy? Type 31s, since they just announced who won those. Ranek Einstein Corral, speaking of revoicing, I'd like to point out the Bismarck video could use a similar overhaul. Yes, it could. I'm planning that particular set of revoicing for to go coincide with another video that I'm working on, but is a little bit delayed at the moment. How much do I like Babylon 5? A lot. Although yes, they're as Galder Ionis points out, their naval system classification does seem a little bit all over the place. Somewhere around here, I've got some old Agents of Gaming white metal miniatures of the Earth Alliance fleet. Probably somewhere upstairs. What the? Oh, stop moving, you wretched thing. Sorry, the chat's just bouncing all over the right place. Ed the Shred, are you going to do World of Warships again? Maybe play together with subscribers for this kind of Q&A stuff. I'm going to do replays in the background. If people want me to do a subscriber sort of playing with subscribers, I guess I could do that at some point. I don't know where I'd fit the time in. But I'll give it a go. If I've got the time, I'd probably have to announce that in advance, though, in a dry dock or something, so people are actually ready for it. Are the Minotaur and Neptune designs real designs? Yes, they actually are. They were seriously considered by the Royal Navy, but they just didn't have the money at the time, immediately post World War II. Okay, that's 154. So I wonder what's going on with the oven. The timer should have gone off by now. And sorry, I was literally about to read off a question, and then the YouTube chatbot just went, no, have another bunch of screens. Like, I was trying to read that. Please stop. Schleppy42 says, what would you have done with the Congo class around the time they were refitted, given Japan's lack of parity in battleships? Ideally, I'd want to replace them, and so did the Japanese, but they couldn't. So, what would I have done? If they're going to be used as fast battleships, you actually need to get more emphasis on the battleship part and slightly less on the fast. I'd say probably drop the engine room requirements down to something giving you in the order of 29 to 30 knots ish. So not that much slower than they historically were, but still it's going to save a fair amount of power. And then use that to up armor them to a point that. See, this is the weird thing, because if I was doing it in the 1930s, knowing that my most likely opposition is going to be a bunch of US standards, I could theoretically, relatively realistically, up armor the Congos to give me at least long to medium range belt immunity against 14-inch shells. So that, as at the time, I almost certainly probably would have done. But at the same time, it's a bit odd saying that, because knowing what happened historically, they're far more likely to run into 16-inch gunships, at which point, realistically, any update you can give the Congos is probably not going to render them effectively protected from 16-inch shell fire without basically stripping the ship apart and rebuilding it to a point that you might as well have built a new ship. Shadow Nagato sent me a Wix replay. Thank you very much. I will include that in the next stream. Tim Hall asked, hi Drac, are you going to do something on the career and adventures of Lord Cochrane? Also, how about one on Royal Navy pre-dreadnoughts? I did the Majestic class pre-dreadnoughts a little while ago, and yeah, I will be covering other Royal Navy pre-dreadnoughts. Like career and adventures of Lord Cochrane, definitely something that needs to be done. Highly amusing set of circumstances he found himself in, but again, it's one of those things like, really good idea, would really like to do it, needs to be on the list somewhere. I don't know where. Celestial Republic, do you watch any of the big human medieval channels such as Lindy Page or Scholar Gladiatoria? Watch Scholar Gladiatoria quite regularly. I occasionally tune into the odd Lindy Page video as well, but to be perfectly honest, these days there's a lot of stuff I end up putting on my watch later list and watching it grow massively whilst I just busy myself actually doing other things like doing this. If the Royal Navy had built the Lion class, would the next class of battleship be more towards the Montana class or Yamato class? The Royal Navy had some very interesting ideas about what to do post-Lion class. They were edging more towards a Montana kind of more 16-inch guns. Though they weren't tending towards 18-inch weapons. Mainly because, well, they were at war at that point, so it would have been easier to design and build a slightly larger variant on the line and add an extra turret of a type that hopefully by that point they would have got working, than try and redesign a brand new turret and a brand new gun in the middle of a war. Right, so we're covering 159, so I am going to have to draw this to a close now. The oven timer is finally going off. I've noticed it flashing at me out of the corner of my eye. So let's pick one more question. Michael Matteson asks, when do you plan to go to the USA? Yes, some people thought I was going to the USA sort of fairly soon. Well, depends on your definition of fairly soon. I'm not going this year. Because, well, weather. and B, because I don't have the annual leave left. So I will theoretically, hopefully, be going in early to mid-April. I will be going for about 2 weeks, give or take a few days. Just try and exploit the bank holidays. Um, and yes, a number of American viewers were very kind to inform me that I had kind of underestimated quite how large America was with my first schedule, so I'm preparing an alternate schedule at the moment. I'm trying to keep in as many ships as possible, but also give myself a few extra days in the places that I was going to spend a day or two in. So just trying to spread it out a bit more. I'm also trying to work out exactly how much all the flights are going to cost, because I might do train or drive, but to be perfectly honest, given the sheer scale of America, I'm far more likely to try and plane it if I can. Albeit I've been given some indications that doing internal flights in the USA is nowhere near as a pleasant experience as trying to do internal flights in the UK. But we'll see. We shall see. I've got some time to get it sorted out. And finally, Jim Dem asked, do you mind if I ask what you do for a living? I am an engineer. I did my degree in civil engineering, and I currently work as a transport and construction logistics engineer for the rather wonderful London Borough of Croydon. So that's what I do. I generally seem to do a relatively good job of it. My main... Actually, I can... Yeah, this will be the last thing I do before I go offline. But I can show you somewhere. Settings. Add. Basically, my job is to prevent a traffic apocalypse as they try and cram in £5.5 billion worth of redevelopment into a town centre that really isn't that heavily suited for it. I mean, it's fine. It can be done. I mean, I'm doing it, so obviously it can be done. But basically, my job is to try and get all the big construction happening without causing the traffic to logjam. And occasionally taking years off my lifespan by going up to the top of the new big towers and trying to overcome my vertigo to varying degrees of success. Right. Okay, apparently you can't do a multiple image remove, but the slideshow has... So if I can... Can I scroll back? No. No, that's forward. Let's try back. There we go. Oh, for flip's sake. I'm still not particularly good at this whole interactive live streaming thing, in case you hadn't noticed. Right, so there we go. Go on Streamlag, catch up. Yeah, so those are the two new big towers going up in Croydon. This was what they looked like about a week or two ago. They're the tallest modular built units, the two tallest modular built towers in the world, as they currently stand at 38 floors on the left-hand side and 44 floors on the right-hand side. You can see they're not entirely finished just yet. But that's just one of the many projects that I try and keep running in my day job. And yeah, that's quite... I mean, I know... yes, fair enough. If you live in some of the big cities, 44 floors doesn't sound like too much. It still is pretty tall. But yes, that is, I think, going to be pretty much it for today. I thank you very much for coming and listening to me ramble on for 2 hours, 4 minutes and 48 seconds. And I will hopefully do something like this at some point in the future. In the interim, Battle of Tsushima video has obviously gone up over the past week, and part 2 of 4 of Canada month has gone up, and Dry Dock tomorrow. So, yes, it is Saturday? Yes, it is. Okay, rightio. So, thanks very much for watching, everyone, and I shall see you another time.